They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking...
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph. That's Jim. That's James. And that way is Paul. You may recognize Paul from such podcasts as last one. Hey, it turns out. Hold on. Let me do a lookup really quick. So, yeah. So I don't know, like what you guys are doing, or how much you guys are enjoying the show. Apparently, the answer is a lot, because every episode has more weekly downloads than the previous. So that's kind of awesome. So let's keep going. I think maybe Paul has something to do with it, and if not, I'm going to go with that. So
as far as you know,
as far as I know, I have no proof to the contrary. All right, here's where we're at. As a lot of good topics that we cover here do, we have an internal chat, and sometimes somebody says something. I'm like, ooh, that's a podcast. This one's James' fault. Okay, James started this conversation, and eventually we got to rolling in a manner that I said, you know what? No, we absolutely, this needs to happen. James, why don't you set it up for us, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think we mentioned we need to figure out how to get this thing so we can just take the text and dump it into one of those Google tools, and it'll create the podcast for us.
But nobody wants to listen to that.
Yeah. So this was all about third-party risk management, and I was just starting asking the questions like, how do we really vet, the third parties when we look at some of the issues that we see out there? And some of it came up looking at a third party, and it was like, okay, here's the document. Oftentimes we get SOC 2, we get these different documents. We might get a pen test report, and I don't know, it kind of triggered me to see a pen test report come back, and it was like one low finding. That was it. Like of this whole system, there was literally one finding. And I started asking the question, like, have we really gotten that good that we can't find anything on it? Like, we're actually securing that well? No. Or are the pen tests just not identifying a lot of things? I don't think I've ever done a pen test where there's only one. We can always find something.
Yeah. And then that conversation somehow spiraled into, well, when we work with third parties, right, we've got all these third party risk programs and requirements. And then you've got people accepting risk, and somebody's explaining it to somebody who doesn't understand what they're hearing. And the person explaining it is explaining it in a way that doesn't make sense to the other person. And I thought, who's built some third party risk programs, I'm sure, in his time? Paul.
I have. And years ago, built one at a company that we would actually go on site to do risk assessments. And what was really interesting is our triage was 10 questions that a security person can ask 10 questions. I don't remember all of them, but like, do you have a named security executive who's responsible for your security program? Do you have security policies? Do you do a pen test? Whatever. I don't remember the 10 questions, but super high level. And it's amazing that people would either knock that out of the park and you're like, okay, they have a security program, not going to look there, not worried about that. Or they totally dork it and they answer the questions and you're like, wow, they have no idea. We are definitely going there. And then there were a few that were in the middle that were like, okay, let's ask them a few more questions. We're not sure. They kind of sound on the fence. But we had people that we would show up, and the guy, my employee that showed up early, went to go walk to the place. He had the appointment at 8:00 the next morning, and found people moving in furniture because they were staging the company. It wasn't really a company. And so that kind of gets at the heart of some of this problem is you can send an email out, but where is that going? And who's answering that? And how real is that? And in our prep, somebody said, it's a point in time, which it is. And so I think one of the biggest challenges here is scale. That you can do this. You can fly out and any of us could walk through and assess the program at depth. But, at another previous employer, I had 8,000 suppliers. Like, how do I do that at scale? And even if you go off some subset of metrics.
Yeah.
So I got
8,000
I could talk for a long time
is not a
about
joke.
this. I have all kinds of thoughts on this.
Well, we get the scope issue too, right? I mean, when you think of like SOC 2, it's scoped to a certain area. When you think about a pen test, it could be scoped to a certain area. There's a lot of things that we look at to where we say, oh yeah, we've got this, but then we don't look at, well, what does that cover? Right. So then you start asking, like, what's the true value of that pen test report, that SOC report, whatever it may be, to actually saying, do we trust the company? Like, I guess it almost starts to come down to what are we actually trying to vet when we talk about third-party risk management, because everybody says, you look at sales drift, you look at some of these other things, and it's like, what about any of that would any third-party risk management stuff have found?
That would be a really cool study. Like take drift or take 4 or 5 of those and run a retrospective third-party risk assessment and say specifically for that, would that have stopped anything?
Yeah, or would we have known outside of the fact that at least we have vendor management? Oh yeah, we know we use that. Let's reach out and verify, are we affected? But
right.
What through any of those things would have identified and said, oh yeah, this app's going to be vulnerable here on this day to do it, right?
Right.
I like Paul's idea of I just recorded an episode with my buddy Trey Ford, and we actually touched on this a little bit. He likened it to essentially being a field triage medical professional, right? Where you show up at an accident scene or in a scene, and what 5 questions, or 3 questions, what 2 questions do you need to answer immediately to figure out, assess the state, right? It's kind of how it is. Because Paul, if you have 8,000, my GE job would look at that and say, that's cute, add an extra 0. But even if you did like 10, because like, oh, well, let's do 10%, that's 800. Even if you did 2 a day, right? Which is impossible. And by the way, how big of a team do you need for that? And nobody's ever in the history of ever going to fund that.
Okay, so this is totally out of balance on both sides, because a big company can't do 8,000 with any regularity or at any depth. Okay, and then you take a small company that, like, you take large financial institutions that they have teams that each person has like 4 suppliers that they just like watch, right? And so you can't get out from under the gaze of that. And so it's burdensome on both sides. And I'm just going to say it. Every security person thinks they're smarter than every other security person. So you have like a 800 question or 1,000 question shared assessments who've been trying at this problem for years, bless their hearts. And everybody goes in and says, I used the SIG, but I changed question 231 because I wanted to. And you're like, okay, so you just blew up the whole thing. Like, seriously, you couldn't get a gauge on risk using the default questions? Like, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, look, but go ahead, Jim. I know what you're going to say.
Well, no, maybe I don't know, because I've had time to think. Has there been a scenario where maybe it's a silly question, but where you do a third party risk and something happens with that third party, and that third party assessment is then used in litigation or any kind of? What has been the result of third-party risk as it relates to post-risk? I'm having difficulty thinking of a situation. So we spend all the time, money, and energy to kind of assess our third parties, which is really fourth dimensional because we're assessing the company that did the pen test. You know what I mean?
That's
a little bit to James's point. But I don't know, just real quick question.
What was the one? There was, and I forget the name of it, but there was somebody that was suing Cognizant because they're their provider of whatever, and they said they gave away passwords for help desk or something like that they shouldn't. Like that, I don't remember the full details of it, but there was something around that. But I think, to your point, right? I mean, what are you doing when you do the third party risk? I mean, in my mind, half of it's you saying, okay, I'm going to send you these questions, and maybe to Paul, like 10 questions. Are you doing this, 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 and this? If you get breached and we're infected by it, right, then isn't it more of being able to go back and say, hey, wait a minute, you said you were doing this, and now we can prove that you did not do this. You had a leader that was assigned a security role, and now coming back, oh, wait, look, you lied on this thing. But again, I don't know where that goes, right? Because here's the thing. I mean, third-party breach, whose name recognition goes all over the news? It's yours, not the third party. That's kind of like behind-the-scenes deal you got to work out to see what's going on.
I think it also drives from architecture, right? So I think it's both the legal accountability in who's liable or, terms. If you're embedded with your supplier department, right, your sourcing organization, then you can drive those decisions of, hey, we're not going to do business unless you do these things. If not, you're just kind of chasing your tail. But it also drives architecture decisions where, let's say you have no control over who's signing what deal. Then you say, okay, well, then we're not going to give them that data, or we're going to tokenize it, or we're going to take some other security control in place that you probably should be doing anyway, but you're going to be extra careful because of the results you got.
This was interesting for me because when we start talking about the architecture discussion aside, because that's the follow up. But when we're talking about looking and I can't stop thinking about what you said about this is dangerous on both ends. Large companies can't possibly look at everybody. Small companies are buried by the large companies, right? And James, I don't know that scoping helps because attackers don't respect scope. That's the problem I have is attackers don't. That's Trey's line, not mine. But like attackers don't respect scope, and I've been thinking about that all day today, as I'm working on some other stuff in my day job here, and it's like, okay, so you are doing some nature of business with a third party. So now we have to go, okay, how do we tier this? How do we figure out who we're actually going to go like pull up the covers and see how many bugs come out versus like who we can just ask like, hey, here's 5 questions, answer these. If they're reasonably good, I'm going to let you just go off and do your thing. Is it the volume of data? Is it the sensitivity of data? And if you're thinking, yes, sensitivity, I'm going to argue that very few people that I've worked with in the enterprise side, when you ask them truly to say, what kind of data, what's the nature of the relationship with this third party you want to establish? They can't adequately explain it that makes the risk formula work. They don't give me the inputs for the risk formula is what I'm saying, right? So Paul, you've built these things, you've operated these things. How does this third-party security thing work in a reasonable manner to where reasonable people can do reasonable things to drive down risk in a way that isn't completely like that?
So that's a lot of reasonables, Raph, and I don't know that I can go directly at that, but I'll do my best.
See what you got.
But I think you have to decide what works for your company, like everything else, right? So at one organization, a lot of data, a lot of sensitive data. So the majority of what we were looking for was what data is moving to a supplier, what's their ability to protect that, and controls around that. It was a very data-centric approach. Other controls are obviously were, are they going to common ones? Are we sending them data? Are they coming inside our environment, right? And then driving controls out of that. So a lot of this, if done correctly, validates kind of which set of security controls a supplier has to adhere to, right? If you're a consultant who's coming in to help plan the holiday party for the company, then okay, I'm not that worried about your security environment, the chance of you creating a problem for me are pretty low. But if you're doing development in our environment and putting things into our pipeline, and you're using your laptop and whatever, you could add on some more nightmare stuff in there, then okay, that's a different story. We have to have a serious conversation about how that's happening. Either because from a security program perspective, not just the ability to protect it, but to detect if something goes wrong and to prevent theft.
Okay. I get it. There's a lot of maybes and ifs. However, how do you do that at scale in a way that's repeatable year over year that keeps the lawyers happy? Mm-hmm. That last part bugs me. Right? Because
I think you have to be able to demonstrate. You have to demonstrate a reasonableness, right? So I don't think there is any such thing as a perfect approach. The challenging part of security isn't the clear yes or clear no's. It's all the gray area in between, right? That's where the majority of security people spend their job, right? That's where we all sit. And so I think you have to define a methodology and then adhere to that methodology. And then somebody can say, I would have done it differently, or maybe you should have thought of this or this. That's fair. But if you ran your methodology, then one thing, you have to be part of the sourcing process, right? You have to have something that sourcing looks at that says, if these criteria happen, security has to become involved. They have to do whatever they do, however they do it, whatever their methodology. But if I'm hiring somebody to provide sandwiches at the luncheon, don't need to call information security. If I'm hiring somebody that's touching data or coming into our environment, I need to pull in security. And I think most companies that are doing something with risk are at least at that level.
Maybe.
I'll take,
and here's why I say that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, here's why I say that. We're struggling to understand the depth, I think, in a lot of these organizations. I've had a bunch of these conversations lately. And from the security, if I talk to somebody that's in the security organization, their questions to me are, well, how deep do we go? Do we talk to like third parties, and then do we ask them to go to their third parties, and we request information from their third parties? Like, how far does that rabbit hole go? When I sit and I gather that information, we start to have that, and I go, okay, let me talk to the people on the other side of the table, the lawyers and the procurement folks. Their question is, how do I make this as fast as possible, provide some level of assurance, and what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know how do you make me feel good about this thing just so I can move on, right? And they are not compatible those are not compatible conversations. There's one's trying to go super, super deep and get a lot of information when we can't do that at a large scale. The other one's trying to get as little and as quickly as possible. And so they're pulling in opposite directions.
Well, I think that goes back to the value, right? And of what we're looking at. And just to comment, I put it in the chat here, but obviously people can't see that. My scoping thing was, we are too scoped. I think we don't realize it, right? Because you get a SOC that's scoped, you get a pen test that's scoped to something. And, we're not really looking at the whole picture. We're looking at whatever that person happened to look at for this thing. Now, obviously that's documented, but the question comes back, what are we really trying? I mean, it sounds like legal's trying to get a checkbox that says, hey, look, we want to be able, it's a compliance checkbox. Hey, we vetted these things. Security is actually saying, no, look, we really want to actually understand the security of this bit. But due to scalability and all that stuff, how are you going to do it? I mean, you get a pen test, great, but that all depends on the person that did the pen test, what they were given access to. Are they any good? They gave me static analysis of the web application. I mean, I looked at a web application that had SAS and DAS run against it with nothing found, but you do a manual assessment against it and it's a train wreck, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it, depending on the person that does the manual assessment, there's a whole different, but organizations can't be sitting there saying, oh, I'm going to pen test all of my vendors. And again,
right. You go broke.
Right. You can't do it. And even if you get a SOC from all of them, even if you get these other pieces, you can't do it. But even then, we go back to that initial piece. What from any given breach out there, if we went and did a hindsight third-party review on it, would any third-party question catch that? And I don't think any of it would, because there's going to be flaws. Some people are less risky to deal with. Some people are more. Maybe that's all we're trying to,
So that's where. So there've been some offshoots. So people have been trying to solve this for a long time, right? So I believe it was AWS, I think, was the first one to go, look, we're tired of all of you asking for our documentation. Here's the page. If you're a customer, come get it. Feel free to download it. We're not getting on the phone with all of you, right? And so other people have replicated that trust center kind of model. That does not work for smaller organizations, right?
Well,
you work for a smaller organization and some big company, and they're like, yeah, that's cute. You need to fill out our questionnaire, and we're going to put that into our process. But the other thing is, if you look at the services that scan the indicators, right? Let's take the indicator approach, the hygiene approach. And, even some of those, that there's, I think, some merit to that, but there's still context problems. Like if you work in an ISP and they're reporting that this huge block of IP space has a lot of badness in it, so your score is low. Well, yeah, that's my subscriber IP space. I don't know what they do. Like, stay away from there, or make it simpler. That's my guest network. That's why I have a guest network. So when people hop on in the lobby with something that's nasty, it's not on my environment. And so some of those do better than others at being able to call that out and pull it aside. But if you're just looking at a score, you're always going to have that context question.
And cue the next episode on scorecard systems out there that we can purchase to rank ourselves. I don't want to get into that here because, good gracious.
No, but Paul, I think you made a point though. You said
to make me drink.
Right, that too. But you said that Amazon could say, Microsoft does this too, where they're like, hey, here's our documentation, here's our trust center, here's our SOC 2. If you don't like it, go away. Okay. But I think there's like 10 companies in the world that can do that. Everybody else gets force-fed as part of some legal agreement. You will fill out our third-party questionnaire. Here's 7,000 questions. And I know 2 companies that have 2 people that are full-time dedicated as part of the Office of Compliance, that their job is to fill out questionnaires. And then what they're trying to do is they're trying to like come up with a system that, and I keep hearing AI used, which is going to be even more hilarious when that happens. But like try to find the commonalities behind them all, and then just so they can copy paste, so it's not always a custom answer. Because that's the problem too. Is as a vendor, right? I remember some of these questions. You're like, oh my god, this requires like 2 hours from 3 different departments to figure this out.
Okay, so all right, I'm going to say this. I implemented a system for this. And again, it's not a panacea. Like everything else, AI, like you still have to have a human in the loop. You still have to look at it. You still have to make sure this is answering the actual question that was asked. But it cut the time it took to complete a questionnaire by like 85 or 90%. Right? Because a lot of these questions are the same over. So I'd put it through. It would answer, let's just say there's 100 questions. It would answer 100 of them. And then there'd be 15 or 20 that were change this a little bit, or it couldn't answer, or whatever, that were unique. But the same questions over and over again, there's a shocking amount of those, which just goes, it'll catch. Like if somebody puts the entire SIG and changes 2 questions, then fine, those 2 questions have to get fixed, but the other 850 questions it'll answer.
Okay, fair enough.
You still have though the value of the question or the answer to the question, right?
Agreed.
I mean, we've seen it forever, right? Oh, do you have somebody that does secure code reviews? And it's like, oh, well, we do peer code reviews, and John over there, he said the word security once. Yeah, we do secure code reviews, right? And like we
Correct.
kind of stress
Agreed.
the truth a little bit when
Agreed.
we answer a lot of those questions. And I think that's where, the only thing I see as potential repercussion there is if something happens, then maybe you have something in your hand to go back and say, you said you did this. Obviously, you did not do this. You lied on this questionnaire, but I don't.
And
the
that may
repercussions of
matter.
that?
And that may matter in court, but in the public court of public opinion,
Right.
it does not.
Right. Might get you something on the back end, but it's not getting you anything, publicly.
Right. It comes down as what I think is we're trying to create a sense of trust. Fundamentally, that's what it is. It's trying to create a sense of trust. And I think it's orbited out from there to come. Well, it's a legal need. We need to confirm this. We need to make sure you're doing that this way, even though we know you need to be compliant with X. We can check it our way. I'll give you a perfect example. And I've been on all three sides of this coin, right? I've been the interviewer, the interviewee, and the consultant, helping both of them at some point in time, right? And so you see the mess from all the different funny angles. But the simple fact of the matter is right now I'm on the receiving end. So big giant primes will ask, are you A, B, and C? And they'll take subsets of standards that they know you have to be compliant to. So instead of saying, have you met this requirement or met this standard, they pick their own set of controls that are important to them, and so I think somebody said it earlier about, once you start changing a question, I think Paul, you said it about changing the questions, you begin to disrupt the universe as it comes to doing that. But the part that I just find fascinating is the fact that the whole how you answer, the scope, to James's point, that you're going to apply your answer to. Yeah, we have a person that looked at that code one time. Yep, boom, yes, check, move on to the next one. We're on a race here. That's the problem.
Hey, I want to ask you a question because this one's for Paul. Because Paul, you've been in these programs. Just from the top of your head, as many as you can recall, has any business relationship ever been killed or not executed because a security review found it too risky?
Yes.
Really?
But that was as the master of the relationship, right? That was, you were the prime, and this was somebody trying to sell it.
I was accountable for risk assessment for the organization. That was a significant part of my job. And the company recognized that was a significant part of the job. And there were some regulatory requirements that came into there towards the end. Not initially, but then some new regulatory requirements came in. And so we were very much on the hook of, if you mess this up, this is going to come back and land on your plate.
Okay.
So we were given the authority to say, nope, not going to happen.
I mean, I think you probably see that more commonly now when you look at, data residency, hey, look, this vendor's in Israel. We can't have our data outside the US, or we can't have our data in certain spots. Like, there are key things that can kill a deal pretty quickly because of those type of requirements, right? I think, Jim, you kind of hit it with the trust factor, and that really what you're trying to do is kind of, do we have somewhat of a level of trust? And if there are risks, can we capture those? I think some of what brings this out, though, is something we've dealt with so long in security is that anytime something happens, the first thing people jump to is, oh, nobody's doing third-party risk management. They don't take it seriously. They don't, like all this stuff with this idea that if you were doing it right, then you wouldn't have had the vendor that was going to get popped, right? Which is, I think, completely dimensional and delusional, right? Like, that's not the case. So I think that's where some of that disconnect come from, is what's the public perspective of what should third-party risk management actually be doing? Is it creating that trust? And, we feel like we're dealing with somebody that's doing things the right way? Or are we trying to eradicate and say, oh, well, because we went through this process, there's no way they're ever going to get breached and we won't get affected by it?
Do we legitimately feel like a lot of the work done under third-party risk is actual security? Or is it just, as I won't out you, but the person who said it, red tape that just needs to get done? It's just something to make the lawyers feel better. It makes everybody it's the placebo. right? Hey, look, we're doing third party risk. Yeah, look at us go. I mean, is it actually solving or diminishing actual risk and the potential security incidents, or is this just something to make us all feel better about ourselves?
I'm going to go with Jim's third side of the coin. You made me think on that one, Jim. It depends, Ref. It depends. So some organizations are using, whether it's a questionnaire, whether it's one of the scoring systems, whatever, they're saying, hey, we need to have a story to tell about this. And so it's not integrated into how they're purchasing. They don't have red lines that say, hey, can't cross here, of whatever sort. And so they run it. And so then if something happens, they can say, hey, we have a third party risk system. Check. There's other people that genuinely do it, but like everything else in security, you have to be early in the process, in this case, in the purchasing process. Because if somebody shows up and says, hey, we've been doing a POC on this for 3 months and we want to go live next Friday, and we got to get this deal signed because we're not going to make our number for the quarter unless you launch it. Security, can you go look at them? You're like, great.
Well, I know the answer. Right? Yeah.
And that's always the rush job, right, Paul? I mean, it's literally like, oh, hey, we need this and we need you to review it by whatever.
Oh, by Friday, that's it. So like we have something that's going to get all of our data, but I've got a solid 4 days to work this in. That's awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, plenty of time. What are you complaining?
But it's all how deep you go, right? I mean, do you pull architectural diagrams? Do you want to see code? Do you want to do this? Like who's
probably not, James?
So right.
Well, exactly.
Okay, Mr. Cotter. So I think, old reference, if you got it or you didn't, moving on. I think that, with security contracts, how many people have been in a negotiation for security contracts and the lawyers are going back and forth and you get pulled in and you're like, look, get the security person on the phone. And they're like, no. You're like, no, seriously, get the security person on the phone. The other security, your counterpart at the client or supplier, depending on wherever you are, you get on the phone, you like finish each other's sentences. It's like a 10-minute conversation. You've solved everything. And this thing's been going around for like a month and a half. Is third-party risk like that? Is it we need two actual security people to have a conversation, whatever, reviewing maybe some preliminary data, to get over, hey, how are you doing this? Now, I had a question on this. Is that how we fix this to make it more real?
If I may jump in, I think the challenge in some cases, it may become, you said it earlier, right? Every security person thinks they're the smartest security person in the security room full of security people, right? So it could be a situation of how things are interpreted, how those questions are asked. It's almost like, two people getting in an arena together. I would love to see that scenario because you could probably cut through red tape super fast and say, hey, look, do you know this or have this or practice that? And they go, yeah. And they throw out a couple of words that is kind of like speaking a different language for 37 seconds. And then boom, you're off to the races and you can look and say, this is good. However, now that decision is sort of not just through forms and looking at analysis, but it's Jim's view. I think Paul's company's doing good. Yeah, we had a great conversation, right? Now all of a sudden it's
Paul said.
Paul said, yeah, that worked really well, right? So I think in the big scope of things, I think that'd be perfect, quite frankly. But I don't know if people are willing to put themselves up for. Can't people really do this? Yes.
Yes.
That's my favorite magnet on my whiteboard.
I wanted to ask you guys, Paul specifically, is when it comes to responding to questionnaires, it's almost like you said it earlier. It's like all the same questions over and over again. Are we thinking as a security industry, we just embrace it, embrace the suck, as it were? So is it one of these things like in the old days, responding to RFPs, pick any business, you're always responding to RFPs. And yeah, I knew you would have a reaction. So the thing is, they make these platforms where you have these, standard answers and you associate them to questions, pre-AI world kind of stuff, right? Are we just need to get better at answering questions? Not answering them fictitiously. Okay, I'm not suggesting like just throwing stuff out there, but should we get better at taking what we do in a security program and creating that knowledge in a manner that makes it easier to answer? Because mean, is that what we're doing, is just answering a lot of questionnaires? Paul?
Yeah. This is so hard because some companies send you a questionnaire and they're genuinely asking, right? And maybe they have a portal. Don't even get me started on the portal systems. Like it's to help the person scale, not the supplier. So then the supplier has to deal with 18 different types of portals, and you have to save it after every answer, or it bombs out. Like some of them are horrible, some of them are okay. But if you take something like shared assessments, the SIG questionnaire or the SIG Lite, right? Sometimes some of those people you can say, hey, I have a SIG. Can you take that? And they will, and they'll say, I'll come back to you if I have any questions. I think that's a perfectly reasonable answer. If you have an industry standard, there's several industry standard questionnaires out there. If you've done one of those and you say, hey, Jim, I'm going to give you this. If you have any additional questions, let me know. And so some people do that, and I think that's a very reasonable kind of transaction. Some companies don't want anybody doing this, and their answer to the scale is outsourcing it to a low-cost country. And so those people want you to go through exactly the form or function. And I'm convinced, not that they're bad people or whatever, but I think they are following it by rote. And so sometimes they don't have the ability to deviate from that exact process. And so by very nature, they're like, no, I really do need you to go through and answer these 800 questions. And then they come back. And so I think there has to be, you have to snap a line somewhere, right? So after the third time of coming back, you have to go, look, this is whatever, I'll make it up. This is a $5,000 sale. You're costing me like $20,000 to answer this. Like, no, you've got me answer, either do business with me or not. We're done.
Well, can I since we're short on time, I'm going to answer this, ask this, and want to end this podcast on the most hilarious note I can think of, because this is depressing.
You're the one that brought up third-party risk, Raf, not me.
Actually, James did. That's why I said at the beginning, this is James's fault.
Everybody put on James.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. With AI, is it just going to solve all this? Read all of our questionnaires, ask the questionnaire questions, and all that stuff. Is AI just going to solve this? Because you can assess all 8,000 of your third parties in minutes or seconds. It can understand the answers and get the nuances that maybe your offshore people can't, or your consultants don't understand how to. Like, is this just a solution? Is this a great place that we can just drop AI and take a step back and go back to the beach?
Raf, do you remember when we did this a couple episodes ago? We were talking about AI, and there was something that came out about the dating world, where like the dating apps, like your AI character would represent you, and we get to the point where your AI would talk to the potential date's AI, and they'd work everything out beforehand and see if you're compatible. Like, this almost falls right into what Jim was saying, or like, hey, maybe we just get on a call for 10 minutes. Like, great, my CISO's AI is going to get on the call with your CISO AI. They're going to work it out, and they're going to come back and either say, yeah, we can do business, or we can't. I don't know. I mean, maybe we get to that point. That'd be fantastic.
I might surprise you, but I'm going to say, yeah. I think AI can do it. Not maybe having calls. It would sound like a modem, though. It'd be like squeaky. Two AI talking together.
AOL's got some extra now that they shut it down.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there are times when you have a set base of information and you're able to sort of structure it and then allow AI to be asked, like LLM, and say, okay, what are they asking? How to best interpret the information that you gave it to learn. You have to be super mindful about what you're giving it. Like, you just can't take your security policies and dump it in there and go, hey, this is what we're doing. And then, people figure out everything that way. But I actually believe this. I think this could be one. I know I've always been like, put $1 in the AI jar guy, right? But I don't know, man. I think
what's to say you can't have it look at your policies and be able to ingest the information they said, and you can query it and say, tell me where their answers don't line up to our policies. That's certainly something that AI could do. Obviously you want to check it, but that's certainly, it summarizes Word documents. How can it not do something like that?
So from somebody who was getting a lot of these, I implemented a tool that's out there that's advertised, and they're an ongoing concern, and I think they did a great job. Was it perfect? No, but it ramped up over time. It got better, and it answered the majority. You could use it for RFPs, and I think the one of the benefits there was we haven't even talked about the fact that your security team is the one who has to answer these a lot of times. And AI gives the opportunity for the sales team or for the business team who's out and staffed up going after RFPs to pull questions. And then if there's something like the small number of questions that the AI can't answer, those come to the security team and you say, hey, here's what that means. You give it an answer, and then they take that pre-approved answer. That's a way for the company to scale out in other roles outside the security team. So that's where, as a supplier to these larger companies, that's where you can relieve some of this burden, because those teams scale up and down depending on the customers they're going after. The security team stays static. So that's where the hope for AI is, I think.
I do think where it'll start to fall apart is the depth question. How many layers deep? Like, do you have a policy? One answer is yes. One answer is we do, and is this section that speaks that control specifically? Or it's yes, here's this section that speaks, and here's exactly what that section says and how it relates to the scope. So I think it all is going to come down to is how more detailed are these questions going to get? Are people going to become less and less satisfied with the questions they're getting, the answers getting the questions that are out there, which is obtuse at the moment? Or is it going to make it self-stabilize to the point where we can answer them consistently? And if that's the case and we understand the depth, then we can probably use AI a little more effectively.
Well, this is exciting. All right. This is exactly the conversation I thought we would have. And it's entirely your fault, James.
I'm glad we have the chat. There'll be plenty of more of these that I'm sure will be my fault.
Yeah. Well, now there's evidence. All right. Thanks, Paul. Your insight's always appreciated. I'm curious what people, if we had only 10 questions to ask every one of your third parties, what are those 10 questions that would help you figure out what the next steps are? Maybe we should just put those together and see who's got good questions.
Even with that, has anybody ever thought to go back to the SIG and look at it and say, each one of these questions, does this make a difference, or whether I would say yes or no to this? Which ones actually matter, or where am I actually tracking a risk that I care about? Do you have an ESG program? Do I care? Do I not? Right? Is that something that matters or not? And that's obviously corp specific, but trying to go through and pick it so that way you're not sending out 800 questions. You're sending out the ones that actually matter to you. But I think, we like the easy general, hey, there's a SIG, let's just do that. Hey, there's a SOC 2, let's just do that. Right? We don't spend time.
I think if you rotated roles, if you took some of the people that are blasting out these 1,000 question, 1,400 question questionnaires and said, okay, guess what? You're going to temporarily go and sit somewhere that's getting 1,400 questionnaires blasted at them, and they're all different. Go work there for 30 days. They would come back and be like, all right, y'all, we got to fix this. This is broken. Right? So I think really it's only people that have been on all three sides of the coin, as Jim mentions, that get the problem. And that's part of the problem.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you for that Welcome Back Carter quote. That was enlightening. Very few people drop those into the conversation anymore. Guys, thanks for listening. This has been fun. Jim, James, Paul, always a pleasure having you guys aboard. It's been another enlightening and problem-solving edition of the podcast. I welcome all your feedback because I'm sure there will be plenty. If you're running a great third-party risk program that you're happy with, that you think reduces risk, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe throw us some questions that you use, some process you use, see how this goes. But this has been fun, and I'm glad we had at least a chance to talk this out. Feels therapeutic. So for the podcast, thanks for listening, you guys. We'll catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Ciao, everybody. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
This is Bella. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave my dad a review and share this with your friends. Bye.